Tales of Arillion, The Last Brachyurus by Zack Riley. Something cold hit Esmeralda's muzzle, and she flinched. She looked up. Water was dripping from the ceiling, again. She wiped the drop from her muzzle and shifted her chair.
Mama, the roof's leaking again.
I'm sorry, my pup.
Her mother sighed as she crossed the room towards her. She took Esmeralda's dress in hand and wiped the water from her face.
Someday we will have a real home, amongst the city's inner walls.
And we'll be happy?
Her mother nodded and smiled.
Yes, my pup. We will be happy.
She stood up, shuffling toward the fire, and then her ears pricked. Something thumped hard against the front door, and Esmeralda jumped, turning toward it. Her mother's eyes wide and ears folded back. Perhaps it was just a passing drunk? But then there were more thumps. Someone was banging their fist against the door. "Open the door!" called out a gruff female voice. Esmeralda's mother crossed the room swiftly to the candles on the shelf, quickly blowing them out until only the orange light of the fire illuminated the room. Esmeralda felt her fur standing on edge as her mother moved to the fireplace and picked up a poker.
Essie,
Her mother whispered.
hide in the cupboard. Now!
Esmeralda couldn't move. Her heart was beating in her throat, and she clutched the edge of the table as the Canid outside kept thumping on the door and yelling, "Essie!" Esmeralda moved. She padded over the stone floor to the old cupboard and opened it. She pushed the cloths and rags to the sides and then nestled between them, feeling herself shaking all over. She peered through the cracks in the doorframe. Her mother was still facing the door, her back to the cupboard, frozen in her fighting stance with the orange light of the fire outlining her fur and dress. Her tail quivered. Few things frightened Esmeralda's mother. "This is bad." The sounds of a loud clinking sound filled Esmeralda's ears. The Canid outside must have attempted to bust the lock free of its housing. She looked at her mother, now standing with her tail between her legs, holding the fire iron. Esmeralda shook. She wanted the Canid to go away. Each breath came harder than the last, and her heart pounded and palms began to sweat. The guard busted through. She stumbled in, her fur streaked red and white, that of a vulpes. The glimmer of rusty damp steel, painted in the colors of the Duke. Iron gauntlets, chain armor, and leather undergarments dripping from the rain. Her eyes looked heavy, her body slowly shifting from side to side, her sword drawn. She stood in the doorway, her breath short and sharp. Esmeralda's mother cowered as she edged back from the intruder, her ears folded back, tail between her legs.
Please, leave me be. I'll give you money. Whatever it is you want, you can take it.
Her mother called, watching the guard growing closer. "Where is the girl?" the guard asked as she slowly advanced. Esmeralda curled into a ball, unable to look. She heard her mother back into the cupboard door. She held her breath, unable to move. Then her mother slammed against the door, the sound of metal through flesh filling Esmeralda's ears. Her nostrils flared and the metallic smell of blood flooded into her head. She peeked between her fingers and watched her mother's fur fall free from the door. Her body went limp and fell to her knees. And then she keeled over and crashed to her side, her tail spasming as the life faded from her body. The warm red liquid oozed from the open wound, and blood dripped from the tip of the soldier's blade.
Mama,
She squeaked, fighting back tears as she attempted to remain quiet. This wasn't fair. The guards were supposed to help. But this guard, this Vulpes, had been acting weird, as if she wasn't a guard at all. Her tail swung wildly around as it flicked against the doorframe, each breath short and edgy. Esmeralda continued to watch in horror as streams of blood trickled down through the cracks in the floor and pooled at her feet. The eyes of the Vulpes looked up. Esmeralda felt her gaze, piercing like the blade that had just pierced her mother's heart. She could see the reflection of her blue eyes and tears running down the pale fur on her face. She had to move, had to run and break free, or she would be next. Her heart thumped wildly. She could feel her pulse on the back of her throat. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, and her breathing became erratic. The Vulpes had moved closer. Her blade appeared to be ready to stab through the cupboard door. She knew this was it, and had to move. As hard as she could, Esmeralda pushed through the door, slamming the handle into the Vulpes and throwing her off balance. She stumbled over a table and rushed for the stairs, her small athletic body no match for the clumsy guard. As she dropped to all fours, a whooshing sound passed over her head, narrowly missing the tip of her tail. Her ears tilted back as she darted up the stairs and onto the balcony. The Vulpes thumped up the stairs. Esmeralda's head darted around. She had one choice. She had to jump from the roof. No small task. She gulped and wished this night had never happened, and that she was older, smarter, and able to help her mother. The adrenaline thumped through her body. Her heart beat heavy against her chest. The Vulpes reached the top and turned to look at her with an angered look on her face. Esmeralda sprinted forward and grabbed the rail with both hands. Her body lifted over the edge as she pushed off with her paws. Esmeralda puffed on a strand of her black hair.
Just great.
She huffed, picking herself up off the forest floor, surveying the basket of food and its contents, now scattered amongst the leaf litter.
Another day in paradise. Serves me right for daydreaming about the past instead of watching where I'm going.
She lifted herself off the ground and looked back at the tree root she had tripped over, and her rabbit trap. She smiled, seeing a small animal with its leg caught. Her gaze shifted from the apples and pears that littered the surrounds to the thick brush opposite her. The hairs on the back of her mane stood on end. Was someone there? Laughter erupted from the shadows as a strange old Canid appeared in the shade of the tree. He was robed from head to toe, his face in the shadows. Her hand swung down to her waist and gripped the handle of her dagger. She shifted nervously, keeping one eye on the old Canid and the other on the ground. He stopped across the clearing, close enough to be of concern, but not enough to be an immediate threat. This wasn't her first encounter with an unknown Canid. As a pup in a Grayless, she had lived on the streets, having to face off with many Canids in order to survive. From the large gray Lupus, who were often rogue soldiers, to the common red and white Vulpes, sly, sneaky, and mostly untrustworthy. Over the years, she learned to defend herself, and eventually those who posed a significant threat met their demise at the hands of her small blade. This Canid was different. She had no idea what he was, concealed in darkness beneath his robe, watching her like a hawk. Her grip tightened on her dagger. She looked at the basket at her feet, the first honest living she had attempted to earn since she was a young pup.
If it's food you want, you can't have it.
Her heart began to race as her eyes darted across the brush in search of an ambush. He said nothing, slowly advancing towards her. She pulled the blade clear of her garments, holding it before her in a threatening stance.
I'm warning you, I'll cut you down.
He stopped beyond her reach, holding a staff in one hand and extending the other out in a conciliatory gesture.
Young Brachyurus, using that would be a waste on such an old Canid like myself. I am withered and frail. I couldn't possibly pose a threat to a thief of your stature.
Esmeralda stepped backwards.
No, Why does he think I'm a thief? I left that life behind when I fled Agrellis with Flynn. A thief? I have no idea what you're talking about. Leave me be, fossil,
she said, slowly reaching for the basket.
I'm no simpleton, young Brachyurus. I'm here to seek out your services. A service only you could provide.
The air stilled.
What do you know about my past?
Was this a ploy to get her to do his bidding? Or did he know something about her mother and that night 15 years ago? No, surely not.
Your reputation has traveled a long way. A reputation built by your father and a legacy that is carried on to you, young Brachyurus. You are one of the last of your kind, and I'd hate to see someone of your stature living in poverty as you currently do.
Esmeralda huffed, taking the basket in hand and turning her back to the Canid.
Find someone else to do your dirty work. I never had a father.
He stared, his head following her every move.
Esmeralda.
Chills ran up her spine.
He knows my name?
She froze up, his eyes pierced into her like a dagger through cloth. She turned back towards the Canid.
I require you to get something for me.
She snorted.
What's in it for me?
Payment. Consider this in advance.
He pointed to a small bag perched on a rock adjacent to her.
And information about your father and another set of coins just as big.
She reached down, picking up the bag, finding several gold coins inside.
This can't be. It's more valuable than the last 10 jobs I've done. Okay, Fossil, what's the catch? Who am I killing, and what do I have to steal?
She dropped the bag back on the stone and turned to face the Canid. The fur on her arms and tail puffed up as a sense of fear crept through her body. The figure laughed.
How you choose to carry out a job is up to you. Killing or not, I require one thing, and one thing only,
he said, holding his staff forward and tapping the base on the ground. A red glow began to emanate from a small stone atop it.
Do you know what this is?
She looked deep into the glow. Her body began to feel heavy and hot. Sweat formed around the edges of her clothing. She blinked and forced herself to look away.
No, I have no idea. I'm assuming that you're a spellbinder or a runesman.
This is one of the stones of power, young Brachyurus. This is what I require you to bring me. And before you think about leaving with that small payment, I need you to understand that you cannot hide from me. I would think very carefully about what you choose to happen next.
Esmeralda's eyes traced onto the small hemp sack. Flint would have a field day if he saw that much money.
Where is this stone then, and why pay so much for it? What information do you have about my
A blinding red flash erupted from the figure's staff, engulfing her body. The smell of burnt hair drifted across her nose as she was encased in what seemed like fire, but was cold to touch. Through the flames she could only see the old Canid. Her joints began to feel stiff, almost burning. Pain raced through her body.
You will do the job, and there will be no questions about why. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, fine, I'll do it. Just make it stop. I won't ask, just tell me what I need to know.
The flames vanished and she fell to her knees, panting heavily.
Very good, young Brachyurus. I am happy to see you have a fair understanding of what is required.
She nodded.
Where's the stone, and when do you need it?
He pointed through the trees toward the keep in the capital.
In the top of the western tower of Crasil Castle lies a locked room. Within it lies a stone on a pedestal. I require it by week's end.
What?
She gulped.
And what if I'm unable to retrieve it for you?
I will turn you to stone.
He pointed his staff toward the rabbit caught in the trap, its large ears catching their attention. The animal struggled, desperately trying to flee. but the line around its legs grew tighter. Another flash of the Canid staff came, erupting in a huge flame. It engulfed the rabbit, the heat forcing Esmeralda to shield her face as the animal screamed out. As the flames cleared, she lowered her hands, studying the small animal. Its tiny figure petrified where it stood.
4 days, Esmeralda,
the Canid said as he disappeared into the shadows.
Shit. How am I gonna do this?
Esmeralda eased the door open, the hinges squeaking beneath its weight. She placed the basket on the floor, then breathed in deep, closing her eyes and sliding her back against the wall down to the ground. She swept up dust with her tail, frustrated with the situation she had endured earlier that day.
What happened to you?
Flynn asked, his head poking around the corner from where he sat in the kitchen. Food dripped from the wiry fur around his mouth, and his large floppy ears perked forward.
You look like you've seen a ghost. I mean, your mane is standing out frizzled. It's like you brushed your fur in the wrong direction or something.
Esmeralda looked at her tail. Flynn was right. Her brown and black fur still stood on end. She let out a sigh and felt the hard thud of her heart against her chest. She glanced at the basket, still filled with the goods she had picked from the forest.
It doesn't matter what happened. We have enough food to last us the next week, minus a rabbit. You did get a rabbit, right, Flynn? Because I didn't.
She asked in an attempt to change the subject. Flynn gazed at her, slowly feeding another spoonful of porridge into his mouth and swallowing it in a smooth action.
Ezzy, I may not be the smartest of Lycian, nor the most intelligent or brainy, but I will always know if something isn't right with you. You haven't been this way ever since we left Agrialis. In fact, it's been almost a full rotation of the sun since you look the way you do right now.
What do you mean the way I look?
She snapped.
Well, your hands are clenched. You look like you have been through a storm. I mean, look at your fur and your clothing. It's a mess. It's as if you've just fallen out of a tree or something.
Flynn pushed back from the table, the chair sliding across the stone floor. She squinted.
Is he really that observant? He leads on a lot dumber than he really is. Flynn, you realize you just said you were an idiot 3 times in the same sentence?
Flynn scratched his head. And there it is, he's already forgotten what he said. She sighed.
It looks like we can't really leave our old ways behind.
Flynn continued to look at her blankly.
In what way? We're both making it honestly at the moment. I mean, I'm sort of a guard, and you're gathering food and selling it to the other refugees. But we're making it honestly. No crime or a need for what we used to do. Life's not exactly hard now.
He extended his hand to Esmeralda, helping her to her feet, then took the basket in hand.
You know, Ezzy, life's almost better than it was in Agrialis. I mean, we have this place, we have food on the table, we have each other, and we're safe.
She pulled away, her ears turned back as she cowered.
This isn't safe. Nowhere's safe. My past...
Hey, Ezzy!
She looked up as Flynn's hand caressed the fur on her cheek.
Calm down. You can't hide it from me. What's bothering you?
She studied his expression. His large, caring eyes and gentle touch soothed her. Relaxed slightly, she walked across the room and splashed water on her face from a bucket in the kitchen. Then she turned back towards Flynn and sighed.
Flynn, how many other Brachyurus have you seen in Chrysal?
Ugh.
He scratched his head.
My point exactly. I was bound to get spotted eventually.
She watched Flynn's face as the tiny little candle within his brain ignited. He turned towards Esmeralda with his arms wide open, a stupid grin crawling across his muzzle.
My Ezzy's the last one,
He called out cheerfully. placing both arms around her tightly in an almost bone-breaking hug. Esmeralda wriggled against his unyielding grasp. It felt as though her eyes were about to pop out of her head.
You idiot! Let me go! This is not a good thing!
His grip released and she dropped to the ground. Looking up at him, she shook her head in disapproval.
What I was trying to say before you tried to break me was, what happened in Arillion all those years ago finally caught up to me.
What do you mean, Agrialis?
He leaned forward, confusion across his features.
Remember the night you found me? What I told you had happened?
She looked away, running her fingers along the rim of the bucket.
Why else do you think I would come through a door like that?
Ugh.
Flynn scratched his head once more.
I never really thought about it, Ezzy. Water dripped down your back? It's cold, and you don't have your blouse.
Flynn, at times, I don't know why I still hang around you. You really say some stupid shit sometimes. It's summer, the sky is blue, and someone stole my purple blouse 2 days ago, so I have to wear this old shirt.
Flynn swallowed, his eyes beginning to water up.
Because you like me?
Yeah, Flynn, because I like you. Sorry, I didn't mean to upset you.
She wiped her face with her sleeve.
Someone spotted me, and long story short, I have a job to complete.
Flynn sniffed.
I thought you liked doing what you're doing now. It's easy. You're not going to die from it.
It's not that. There's something else, Flynn.
She walked into the bedroom looking for a clean shirt to put on. Flynn followed and sat down on his bed, looking out the window toward the Capitol.
I thought we agreed you weren't going to do this again. It almost got you killed last time, Ezzy. I don't know what I would do without you.
He knows about my father. And this is something I need to know. Anyway, why do you think they hired me to do all those jobs, Flynn?
Because you are the best thief there ever was?
I wouldn't say the best, but I always manage to get the job done, even if it almost kills me.
She said, pulling on a clean shirt on over her head and tucking her fur in around the neck. Her eyes caught Flynn's as he turned back towards her, a smile returning to his muzzle.
If you need this, Ezzy, I'll support you. After all, you are the best thief I know. What do you expect to find out?
I don't know, but he knows something. Something about that night, and I need some form of closure. And he's paying me well for the job, too.
Flynn looked away, raising his hand and brushing it over his ear.
I mean, we could really use it right now, especially with the colder weather a few months away and this place falling apart.
For an idiot. At times, he says some really smart things.
She thought as silence filled the room. Flynn's eyes fixated on the stone rabbit lying in the basket. Esmeralda approached the rabbit, heaving it up, and brushed her hands across its face. She frowned, feeling the cold, abrasive texture against her palm.
This is what has me down.
Yeah? What about it?
Flynn looked through the doorway and cast a gaze on the statue.
Ezzy, what's this for? It's pretty neatly carved. It's really interesting and it looks really lifelike. Similar to those ones Mr. Marco used to make back when we were both kids.
Esmeralda's ears pricked.
Flynn, did you know that Jonathan Marco wasn't a stonemason? It never crossed your mind that none of the small statues in his displays ever looked like anything other than lifelike?
Ugh. No, I don't remember a lot from him other than that Anthus used to send shivers down my spine. And Papa always told me not to go near him. So what does he have to do with any of this, though? I thought he stayed in Arillion when it fell.
Esmeralda nodded.
He did stay, and he's probably dead now. But that's not the point. The point is, he was a spellbinder, and always had a firestone. This rabbit is no statue. Well, it wasn't a statue this morning. The Canid who gave me the job, I believe, is one, and a very powerful one. If I fail this job, he's gonna do that to me.
She dropped her head forward, letting it thud against the wall. Flynn crossed the room, placing his hand on her back, and began to gently rub.
Hey, Izzy.
She looked up and smiled. Sarcasm filled his voice.
When he turns you into a rock, can you try to look a little happier and sit like you're listening to a conversation so I don't feel lonely?
You idiot! That's not gonna happen, because I'm gonna finish the job!
She yelled as she slammed the rabbit into his gut. Flynn looked up with a wince and a large smile on his face.
That sounds more like you, Izzy. How much did this Canid pay you?
To be honest, I never counted how much, you know? I just looked in the bag. It's all real. It's heavy. Too heavy.
She turned around to face him, leaning back against the wall.
Don't even think about running with it. I have a really bad feeling about this one.
He placed the rabbit on the floor next to the door.
In what way? Like your luck is up or something?
Like our luck is almost up, Flynn. Not just mine.
The room fell silent again. Flynn's gaze focused on Esmeralda, and with a twitch of his ear catching her attention, she looked up.
What?
What makes you so sure about that?
Flynn, take a look around us. We live amongst refugees and had to flee Arillion because of the parasite. The world is getting smaller, and in all the time that we lived here, we still know nobody and lay low. But still, this Canid appears and knows exactly who I am. I said it before, and I'll say it again. I really do have a bad feeling about this one.
Flynn shrugged.
I don't. So what do you suggest we do? The job, that is. Wait, what are we actually stealing?
The old Canid talked about something called a Stone of Power on a pedestal in the keep of the Crystal Castle. My guess is it's a rune of some kind, with a power similar to what he used on what was to be dinner tonight.
She shuddered at the thought.
Anyway, our best bet is to head into the city. I have an idea, you so-called guard. Let's get what we need and leave at first light.
The noon sun blistered down onto the dirt road, bringing with it wavy lines of heat that radiated off its surface. Flynn bumbled on ahead of Esmeralda, humming a tune, and kicked the odd stone ahead of him. Esmeralda paced behind and welcomed the cool, moist air of the ocean as it rolled over the hills.
Wow, Izzy, this place reminds me of Arillion so much.
Flynn looked at the city's gates and the hive of activity within. Horses trotted down the streets, pulling carts. The clash of tools reverberated from the blacksmiths and stonemasons. Young Canids played, and heckles sounded from within the markets. Esmeralda smiled.
Yeah, I think the king of Arillion was the brother of Crystal Sovereign. Anyway, mind on the job, and not on who's in the crown.
So, what's your plan then?
My plan is to get you into a guard's uniform, and then find a way into the castle, even if it's just a distraction. Then, just like the job in Arillion, I'll sneak in and take it.
You know I'm not really a guard, right? I just pretend to be one in the wards because it keeps things quiet and keeps the beggars away.
Yes, but you've done it for so long now. Even the real guards pass you off as one of their own.
I never noticed. So how do you anticipate we get a guard's uniform?
Esmeralda looked down the street at the guardhouse. She hadn't given it much thought other than to just take it. But that left the dilemma of finding a viable excuse for Flynn to be in a roster of guards that night without raising suspicion. Her attention was captured by a lone guard walking through a circle of young Canids, knocking one over.
Hey Flynn, do you think this armor will fit you?
Yeah, but he's wearing it.
You idiot.
She glanced sideways at him.
Just stay out of sight and follow me. I'll get his attention and find out what we need to know. Then, when I say, you come in, and we take what we need.
Esmeralda sucked in a deep breath and strolled up to the guard, who was now being heckled by the children for wrecking their game. She stepped on the tail of a young Vulpes and grabbed his ear.
You and your friends are gonna leave this poor, fine Lupus alone, or I'll rip this ear off.
She tugged down firmly and then released him. His ears and tail dropped as he frantically nodded, and the other children ran away screaming. The guard clapped.
What a fantastic display of dominance over the filth of this fine part of the city, madam.
I'm sorry. I just couldn't bear to see those pups taunting a big, handsome Lupus like yourself anymore. Especially one who wears the crown's colors.
Indeed. And what brings the lovely Canid to this part of the city? You look a little on the dirty side, though. This is the wrong end of town for a lady of the night. The nobles wouldn't take too kindly, I would think.
The guard said, his eyes tracing her body up and down. She looked down at her clothing, noticing the mud on the back of her hands stuck to the fur, and rips in her shirt.
He's not wrong. If we are to have any luck with this job, we have to blend in,
she told herself.
Oh, Sir Guard, I feel offended. I am no lady of the night. I also had a run-in with some of the filth, and it so happens I need to find a place to wash up. You don't know of a place, do you?
She asked, her voice becoming flirtatious. The guard smiled, his tail beginning to flick side to side.
Well, madam, I may just know of this place. However, it will cost you,
he said, rolling a coin between his fingers. Esmeralda smiled, running her tail around the Canid's armor.
Please, lead the way. And well, we can discuss just what it cost. Then, perhaps we could have a little drink together later tonight, you know, after we find somewhere a little more private.
She winked, then brushed the sides of her shirt, ensuring her dagger was still tightly tucked into her belt.
I know just the place,
he said, gesturing with his hand for Esmeralda to follow. She cautiously looked over her shoulder, eyeing Flynn trailing behind. Her chest pounded as she began to follow the guard down one street and off into a dark series of alleys, each one more deserted than the last, cluttered with crates, barrels, and the odd cart, just as she had hoped. The pair stopped at a frail door with the text, Batman's Night Quarters, above it.
Oi! Why are we at the steward's den? I'm not a steward.
The guard grinned.
You're going to clean this place for me,
he said as he planted himself on a bench against the far wall. Esmeralda looked over her shoulder once more. Flynn now stood with a broomstick in his hands, ready for her to call. She nodded at him and stepped through the door, rolling her eyes at the thought of cleaning.
You realize there's more than one way to pay. I didn't really have domestics in mind.
Oh, well, it needs to be done, and I don't want to do it.
The guard's eyes fixated on Esmeralda's body.
So what race are you? Like a jackal or something?
He asked, looking at the fur extending down her neck. She glanced back over her shoulder, looking at his face. The gray tuft of fur on the sides of his muzzle lifted with a confused look.
This guy's dumber than Flynn. What race am I? There haven't been any Zerdas for a year. They've all died out. This could work. Perhaps. Have you seen a Zerda before?
She asked, catching Flynn out of the corner of her eye, scratching his own head. The guard looked up.
Nope. A Zerda, you say? I always pictured a Zerda a lot shorter than what you are,
he said, his face looking just as confused as Flynn's. Esmeralda's eyes darted into the next room, spotting a bedsheet crumpled on the floor.
Would you like to see a trick?
She asked, her tail brushing against his face as she stepped behind the wall, beginning to giggle. The guard leaned forward, nodding, watching as Esmeralda held the sheet in front of herself. Giving him a smile, she lifted it above her head, the bottom still touching the floorboards, covering her feet from his view. Tossing the top of the sheet in the air, she ducked left and against the wall, allowing it to fall free, giving the illusion she had disappeared. Staying silent, she reached inside her garments, withdrawing the dagger from her belt.
Hey, that was pretty good. I remember seeing that done once before, but not nearly as well as that.
Esmeralda said nothing, tightening her grasp on the blade.
Are you coming back?
He asked. She remained silent and still. The sound of his loud footsteps began to cross the room. As he passed through the door, she lunged forward, slamming him against the frame. He yelped out in pain as she slipped on the sheet, her dagger sliding off his armor and through his hand, pinning him to the wall. The guard slammed his free hand against Esmeralda's throat and then pinned her to the floor. Flynn burst through the door, driving his shoulder into the guard's back. The guard winced at the sound of his metal armor clashing against itself, and losing his balance and falling forward, he landed on Esmeralda, his impaled hand falling onto her chest. His helmet skidded across the floor and into one of the stone walls.
You and your friend will pay for that, you little bitch!
He called out, pulling the dagger free from his hand. Flynn lunged forward and swung a broomstick, breaking it over the guard's arm. The impact caused the guard to fumble and drop the dagger to the ground. As quickly as she could move, Esmeralda dived for the blade, meeting the guard's hand in a struggle of strength. Flynn swung at the guard's head. The lupus deflected and Flynn collided with the doorframe, knocking himself out. Feeling the guard beginning to overpower her small figure, the top of her blade pressed against her neck. Esmeralda panicked, driving her knee upward into the guard's groin. He immediately released his grip on the blade, dry-reaching. She took the dagger in hand, driving it into the guard's neck multiple times. He gagged, coughing up blood, and falling back onto the sheet. His body convulsed, and after a short time, fell limp as his pupils grew misty. Flynn sat up in a panic.
Ezzy, are you okay?
He asked, rubbing his head.
Yeah,
She said, looking at the guard's lifeless face.
he almost got me. Flynn, go get one of those barrels from the alley.
She withdrew her blade from the guard's neck and wiped it on the sheet.
Yeah, okay. How did you know this place would be deserted?
He stepped out into the alley, grabbing an empty barrel.
I didn't, but the Batman changed watch at sunset. I figured these guys wouldn't be back for a few hours, yet...
She called out as she loosened the straps on the guard's shoulders and pulled off his armor.
What's a Batman?
He asked as he rolled the barrel into the building, then lifted the guard's corpse, stuffing him in the barrel with the sheet on top. She rolled her eyes.
A Batman is a personal steward to an officer, but generally, they're just stewards.
Ah,
He huffed.
so, did you see anything about the watches or how to get me into the castle?
He asked as he tightened the chest plate around himself. She grinned.
Yeah, didn't you see the sign?
Batman's night quarters.
Yeah, I dress up as a Batman. You walk me into the front of the gate. There's a list of watches the lupus was supposed to be on. It looks like you're gonna have to cover for him. So you transferred in from the outer wards. I'll take care of getting the stone. You just keep the distractions going from the outside. It's not exactly the same plan as what we've done before, but same concept.
She rummaged through a pile of dirty clothing, hearing Flynn rolling the barrel into the alley and the placement of broken planks and waste on top of it. As he returned to the building, he stopped, facing her. He sighed.
Esmeralda, we weren't meant to kill this one, right? It's not really our way. Don't you ever feel bad for all the Canids you've killed over the years?
Flynn.
She paused, nodded her head, and then swallowed.
Every time. It never gets easier. And watching them fade away reminds me of watching Mom die.
She clenched her fist, punching the pile of clothing, and aggressively turned towards Flynn.
Ever since that bitch Vulpus guard stormed in, she struck my mom down and took everything I had.
Tears ran down her muzzle.
The guards don't care about us. We're filth to them. He was a sleazeball. and I have yet to meet one who truly cares. Nobody cares. Not even my father did.
Flynn stepped forward, bending down and wiping her eyes on his sleeve.
Come on, Izzy. We have to move before anyone finds us. And I promise that we will find a nice guard for you one day.
Esmeralda pushed Flynn's hands away and picked up the pile of dirty clothes. She threw them over the blood on the floor.
There. Looks like the mule breeds have been in here. Get out for a moment and let me find a Batman's dress that fits. Then, let's get a drink.
Sunset brought an end to the hustle and bustle of the streets, giving way to lamplighters and the odd Canid making their way home from a busy day of work, or the odd couple giggling as they made their way toward the local tavern. The Red Ox seemed to be the choice for most of the castle's servants, guards drinking off duty but still in uniform, and the Batmen flooding out of the castle's walls after the watch changed. Esmeralda sat against the back wall of the tavern in a dark corner, as Flynn returned to her with 2 large jugs of ale.
Thanks. I needed this. Although, I don't believe it's gonna help. And I feel like an idiot for the way I'm dressed now.
Flynn smiled.
Ugh. Hush and enjoy yourself for once. You look pretty dressed as a Batman. Maybe even one of those nice guards will fancy you.
She glared at him, snatching a jug from his grasp and taking a large swig.
Well, if you want to go have fun for a bit, you know where I'll be.
Flynn nodded and disappeared into the crowd. She turned her head, peering at the keep over the mug.
Well, we've come this far. Now I just need some way of finding out how to get up to the keep. And the stupid dress doesn't help. It's so restrictive. Feels more like a nightgown,
she thought, taking another sip of her ale. She put her head on the table and looked at her feet. Another Canid bumped into the table, knocking over her drink. Esmeralda's head flew around to find a Vulpes had clumsily planted herself down on Flynn's stool.
Yay, here we go,
she thought, rolling her eyes.
Standard Vulpes. Red fur, white chest, long black hair, and already slurring her words.
Hey, honey, haven't seen you around here before.
She sounded like a bubbling spring and quickly placed her hand over her mouth. She grinned.
You look like you've had a tough day,
she said in a playful tone.
Hasn't been the best of days, to be honest.
You want to talk about it?
The Vulpes burped, and the scent of fish filled Esmeralda's nostrils. She turned her head.
Nope, but thanks for asking. It feels good to hear that sometimes. Okay, so first impressions aren't everything.
The Vulpes leaned over the table, picking up Esmeralda's mug.
I remember my first days as a Batman, getting treated like crap by the officers. No respect towards us girls. And just a little hint.
She leaned in next to Esmeralda's ears.
Keep clear of the guards. They say Batman should not be seen, only their work displayed. That's okay, because they patrol to a strict timetable, so you can usually avoid them. And never use the front gate dressed like that. Batman's entrance is on the side. That way, you don't have to deal with them either. They won't stop you, but they will haggle with you. Like you're lower class to them. Not even us chambermaids get the privilege.
Esmeralda smiled. This Vulpes couldn't have come at a better time. She was drunk, flirty, and willingly sharing information about the guards' movements. Her smile turned to a grin.
Well, actually, I did encounter one guard today. He was a real sleazebag and just stood there ordering me around. I don't even think he had the right to do so. But, being new, I had no idea. How do I avoid guards like that?
Oh, honey, no. No. He had no right to do that. Where did he find you?
I was just walking. Nobody told me I couldn't be in the hallways.
The Vulpes turned away. Did she catch the lie? Esmeralda tensed up. Was this something the Batmen of Crasil actually did? The Vulpes fumbled around for a moment before turning back with a huge grin on her face.
Honey, come see me tomorrow near the dining hall around noon. We'll get you sorted with one of these.
The Vulpes reached into her pocket, withdrawing a piece of paper.
It's just a list of movements that happen every hour around the castle.
Esmeralda looked at the timetable and smiled.
Thanks. That will definitely keep me out of trouble. You dumb klutz. That's exactly what I needed.
She thought, looking at the girl.
What did you say your name was?
I didn't. It's Jenna.
Elizabeth.
Esmeralda replied, using an old cover name.
Thank you for the info. I'll put that to good use. Would probably save me from hiding,
She said, laughing a nervous laugh. Jenna edged up beside Esmeralda, looking back over the crowd.
So who's your partner? He doesn't seem too interested in you tonight.
Oh, we're just friends. Have been for a long time.
Jenna placed her finger on the table, swirling it around in some of the spilt cider.
So, you wouldn't mind if I went and mingled with him for a bit? He's kinda cute for a lichen.
She sounded slightly embarrassed. Esmeralda stood up, taking hold of her empty jug.
He's all yours. I need another drink.
Oh, thank you.
Jenna stated, jumping to her feet and prancing across the floor toward Flynn. Esmeralda sighed, hoping she would have at least paid for another jug of ale. She turned and looked back toward the keep out the window. She eyed a ledge that ran around the exterior of the castle's wall directly below the tower. Several shadows protruded from its sides, overlooking the harbor, and on top of the tower sat a damaged battlement, probably from the years of abuse from the weather. A lupus or vulpes would never make that climb, nor a jackal or any other of the canids around. None of them were races native to the mountains. Scaling walls ran in Esmeralda's blood. It was who she was, and why Brachyurus were always the ones tasked with the dangerous jobs. With her long legs, thin build, and fine dexterity, her kind could scale a building in moments, whereas others would struggle with their bulky builds. She looked at Jenna, knowing she needed the timetable now. Noon the following day would be too late. She studied the castle once more, the smirk still across her face.
I just need a distraction to get it from her, and then slip inside the castle walls.
She placed her mug on the bar and worked her way through the crowd toward Flynn, who appeared to be enjoying himself talking to Jenna.
Hey, Ezzy, what's up?
He asked in a casual tone, turning away from the Vulpes.
Flynn, push me into her.
She whispered.
How hard? What do you want it to look like?
He asked, hesitating.
Make it look like we're starting a fight. Or I'll do it for you. Now hurry up and do it.
She said under her breath, pushing against Flynn's chest. He took a step back and then gathered himself and pushed, knocking Esmeralda into Jenna and several other canids. Like dominoes, they crashed onto the floor and the red ox fell silent.
You fucking guards have no respect for any of us Batmen.
Yeah, we haven't had any respect in a long time.
One of the male Batmen called out. Within moments, yelling had erupted from both sides of the tavern. Alcohol-fueled tension filled the room, guards heckling the stewards. Esmeralda grit her teeth, waiting for the scene to escalate. Growing frustrated, she stormed up to Flynn, winked, snatched his drink from his hands, and threw it in his face. Like a sudden clap of thunder followed by rain, the tavern erupted with fists flying left and right. Esmeralda grabbed Flynn by his ear, pulling him clear and making their way to the door as bar stools and jugs began to fly across the room. They stepped out onto the street, looking over at the gatehouse.
Is that what you wanted, Ezzy?
Yeah, I got it.
Got what?
Esmeralda unfurled her hand, revealing the timetable to Flynn.
Movements of all the guards in the castle.
She said with a grin.
I grabbed it from the Vulp's pocket when we fell.
Nice. So now what?
Well, the guards are distracted now. So, you head to the west wall and wait there. When I get the stone, I'll toss it to you, and you disappear, just like that job in Agrillas.
Flynn nodded.
Please be careful, Ezzy.
Don't worry about me. I'll get out over the rooftops. You should fit in on the streets. With all the commotion going on, they won't even think about the guard from earlier for at least another day or two. I'll catch up with you tomorrow back at home.
With a nod from Flynn, she turned and walked past the gates in search of the Batman's entrance. Cold, damp air wrapped around Esmeralda like a heavy coat. The wide-open hallways were lit by small torches, leaving areas bathed in darkness. It was a thief's dream. She slipped into the shadows, watching a guard make her way down the passage, stopping and checking each door on her rounds. Esmeralda looked at Jenna's list.
This has to be the floor warden.
Staying in the shadows wasn't the best option here. The light may have been dim, but the floor warden would have still recognized her as being suspicious if she stayed in the shadows. Esmeralda removed her dagger from a small sheath in the dress, sliding the blade up her sleeve. She wasn't planning on using it, but it was there if she had to. Esmeralda walked towards the stairs a short distance behind the guard. She kept her head down low and her face to the side, and did her best to avoid eye contact. In passing, she gave a small nod and received one in return. As her feet reached the first step, the guard called out,
"You, Batman."
Esmeralda froze, gripping the dagger within her hand tightly.
Yes. Can I help?
She turned slightly and kept her face from view.
The captain is poorly and needs new sheets. Go get some from the linen press and place them in his quarters. Take the old ones to the washroom.
Oh, wasn't this a surprise? Soiled sheets were the last thing she wanted to be doing right now. Esmeralda stopped. This was the exact opportunity she needed. The guard's armor appeared nimbler than her own heavy dress, and she would probably need it if she was to escape in a hurry.
Understood, ma'am,
she said, making sure to keep her grasp on the dagger.
Can you show me where the linen store is? This is my first night watch, and I'm still finding my way around.
The guard looked back at Esmeralda and huffed.
Your first night watch? Who is in charge of you?
Jenna, the chambermaid. She said she had something that she needed to do tonight. Something about the Red Ox.
She shrugged. The guard placed her hand against her face and let out a sigh of frustration.
That useless bitch has skipped the night watch again? We can get the captain sorted now and worry about Jenna tomorrow. Follow me.
Esmeralda followed the warden up the stairs and down a hallway towards the keep. This had worked out better than sneaking through the shadows. She was being led almost to her destination, and better still, now had a solution for her bulky clothing. The warden opened the door and walked into the room, then stood against a window looking out toward the highlands.
Take what you need,
she said, her attention now focused outside. Esmeralda checked the list once more. The floor warden had been close to completing her rounds. She wasn't due to hand the keys over until the change of the guard at midnight. She smirked, stuffing the list back into her pocket, and scanned the shelves of linen, weighing her options. She had been seen now, and having mentioned Jenna, she could be easily identified. Stupid move, but it was necessary, she thought, pulling a Duna off the top shelf, allowing it to open out. She had to take the guard out, not necessarily kill her, but leave her out of the picture. There was no way she was going to the captain's quarters. She herself didn't want to fall ill. It would only complicate things trying to make a bed, and this time she would have to fight without Flynn's assistance. The warden turned a disapproving look upon Esmeralda.
Really? I said sheets, not a Duna,
she muttered, obviously becoming frustrated.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
She really did. It was an excuse to bend down and undo the restrictive lacing on her petticoat. She couldn't fight with it being so tight. She needed the warden's clothes, and the dagger wouldn't be much help if she missed. She had no choice but to use her hands. As the garments loosened up, she grabbed the edges of the Duna with both hands and looked up at the warden.
What's that?
She said, pointing out the window. The guard turned and Esmeralda launched forward, slamming the Duna over her head and shoving her to the ground. The warden struggled, snapping her teeth through the sheets.
What in the paws are you doing?
The guard yelled. She grabbed Esmeralda's arm through the Duna, digging her nails in. Esmeralda let out a yelp of pain as the warden pushed free, climbing to her feet, and attempted to rip the tattered cover from her head. Blood oozed from the gash in Esmeralda's arm, dripping onto the wooden floor. She smirked, her tail flicking side to side. She rushed forward, slamming the warden against the wall. The guard's body fell limp. Most likely she had been knocked out. Esmeralda stood up, kicking the guard in the head. Then she stood still, listening to see if any of the castle's guards had been alerted. With her eyes closed, she listened to the shouts from the ongoing squabbles of the bar fight. The only other sounds were the waves crashing over the rocks, and the husky, gargled breathing of the guard. Nobody from within the walls of the castle was coming.
Just in case.
Esmeralda approached the door. Then she pulled one of the heavy shelves across it, blocking it from being opened. She turned and looked at the guard, saying,
Sorry, babe. I need this.
As she began to strip her of her armor. She looked out the window, hearing the commotion still coming from the Red Ox, then back at the guard. If she did wake up, she was going to cause problems. Thinking quickly, she stripped the sheets off one of the shelves and threw them over her body, and then pushed the shelves on top of her. She would live, but be incapacitated, at least until morning. And if she was found, it would look like the shelves had just fallen on her. At least until someone worked out her armor was missing. Esmeralda climbed out the window and looked up at the angry sky. She needed to begin the climb before the rain started. Wind lashed the side of the castle walls, followed by the piercing spray from the sea and the growing rumbles of thunder. Esmeralda worked her hands into the small openings in the cobblestone. Her grip was tighter than a moose in a rabbit trap. Using her tail to balance, she scooted from ledge to ledge, and although this wasn't the first time she had scaled a wall, she had never had to fight against bitter cold winds and heavy rain. But this was what her race was known for. It was something her mother used to say, and what she had heard about the Brachyurus who lived high in the mountains and scaled the cliff faces centuries ago. It was a way they kept their homes safe from other Canids, back in the less civilized days of segregation. The glinting flame from a low window reflected off a guard's sword, bringing her back to reality. Just beneath her lay an opening, a small window in the castle wall, and the guard was leaning against it, his sword protruding out the opening. A strong gust of wind pummeled her body. She slipped, letting out a small gasp. Her tail flicked hard against the wall in an act of desperation, trying not to fall. If she did, from this height, it wouldn't be immediate death, but it would hurt. A lot. And there would be no way Flynn could save her if she did. Then her thoughts went to the spellbinder and his threat. Lying in agony as he would manipulate her body and turn her to stone, forever trapped within the rock.
At least I don't have to face the parasite that wipes out a Grayless.
Hey, who's there?
A voice sounded from below.
You're hearing things. It's just the wind.
Another voice sounded. Esmeralda continued to hug the wall, her eyes catching movement from her pocket. Another strong gust of wind hit the tower. The list in her pocket slowly worked its way out, farther and farther, with each gust, being assisted by the spray from the waves below. Her ears dipped.
No, no, no,
she told herself, watching it come loose. She snapped at it with her muzzle, attempting to catch it in her mouth, and almost lost her balance. Her eyes followed the sheet of paper carried away in the wind and spray, curling with each gust and slapping against the cobblestone.
What's that?
The first guard said, his arm reaching out the window. Esmeralda continued to hug the wall. The guard's hand snatched the list and pulled it inside.
What is it?
The second guard asked.
A timetable from one of the Batmen. Ugh, Jenna.
the first said. The torchlight continued to flicker in the window. If she was seen, the whole job would be a failure. Her ears dipped. She closed her eyes, fearing this would be her undoing. A bolt of lightning struck near the tower, followed by an enormous crack of thunder.
Shut the window. No idiot would be out in this. The Batman probably left it on the table, and it blew off in the wind. If it's plagued you're worried about, they aren't this far south, and they most certainly can't scale the walls of the castle.
Immediately the torchlight dimmed with the sounds of the storm shutters closing. Esmeralda let out a large sigh of relief. Now soaking wet, she continued to climb to the top of the tower. Reaching the top level, she heaved herself onto an easement, fighting the wind. She slowly worked her way around to find the damaged battlement she had seen earlier. She perched herself on the opening, resting and regaining her strength. Her arms and legs ached from the climb. Salt water from the sea spray was in her eyes, and her ears absorbed the sword-clashing sounds of the wind, giving her a headache.
Next time I'll use the stairs,
she told herself as she rubbed her eyes. She looked at the opening, which was boarded up against the wind, and pulled the dagger from her belt. She forced it in between the boards, levering the planks free one by one. As the final plank fell, Esmeralda crawled into the opening and onto a dust-covered wooden floor. The wind forced itself through the cracks in the floorboards, causing little dust tornadoes to form, throwing leaves and small pieces of paper around the room. She paused, waiting for a guard to burst through the door. She could see his feet through the gap at the bottom of the door, but they stood still. Her eyes drifted up, fixating on a pedestal at the center of the room. Each flash of lightning displayed the stone atop. Carefully she approached, attempting not to draw attention with each squeak of the floorboards. With her satchel ready, she looked at the stone, but eyed a small wooden plaque with text roughly etched into it.
The days are dark. The sadness we face, to my 2 daughters. I am sorry. You are the hope now. I leave this. My bereavement?
What was that supposed to mean?
The old Canid said nothing about this. About the 2 daughters. Is this why he wanted the stone? He knows who they are? The stone of bereavement?
Her hand reached forward, brushing a fine layer of dust from atop the stone. The stone started to dimly glow, like the last flicker of a candle. Esmeralda's jaw dropped.
What is this thing? Runestones don't do this,
she muttered in confusion. She bent down, her eyes level with the stone and her nose almost touching it. The castle's bell started to sound, marking the midnight change of watch. It was time to go before someone grew suspicious of the warden's whereabouts. She stood back up and took hold of the stone. It changed color, turning almost solid white. The light bled up her arm, and within a moment her body began to glow. Chills shot up her spine, her tail puffed out, and her ears dipped. She yelped, dropping the stone into her satchel.
Hey, what was that?
The guard called out from the other side of the door. Esmeralda darted for the opening and looked out into the night sky. Although it was the middle of the night, the light from the 2 moons shone through the clouds onto the tower, their glow cutting the clouds like a sword through snow. The tower now sat in the eerie stillness, in what almost appeared full daylight, with the storm continuing to batter in the dark. She squeezed back out the opening when 2 guards burst through the door, one firing a crossbow at her. The bolt hissed through the air as it passed, narrowly missing her head.
Out here!
One of the guards yelled. Shouts began echoing from within the castle's walls. Her heart thumped against her lungs and her tail puffed out as she hurried around the edge of the tower, struggling to keep hold of the slippery stones. The wind howled, blowing up the sea, causing the spray to form a blinding mist in the moonlight around the tower. Arrows and bolts sailed past her as she continued to struggle around, away from the jagged rocks of the ocean and toward the streets. All went quiet, with the exception of the sounds of the waves, the mist providing enough cover for the guards to not have a clear line of sight. Arrows continued to zip by her head, but she clung to the wall, hoping for a sign of safety below. Making her way onto the west wall, the mist lifted slightly, and through it, a figure in the street appeared. His out-of-proportion body and large ears were easily identifiable. Flynn.
Ezzy!
He called out. She unclipped the satchel from her belt and tossed the bag towards him, the sound of it hitting the street echoing off the walls. The moment it hit the light from the twin moons, they vanished behind the clouds, sending the castle into darkness once more. A glow from flames began to burn from atop the walls. Esmeralda panicked. She knew what was about to happen, hearing the barrel of tar being positioned overhead. Her path back to safety was now blocked as burning tar spilled down the wall, and she couldn't jump to the street. She would break her legs from this height.
We missed her! Back that way!
She scrambled back across the wall out over the ocean once more, slipping with every second step. Her eyes stung from the salt spray and her arms ached from the climb. With the hiss of another arrow, she took a deep breath and leapt from the walls into the sea, narrowly missing the rocks below. Esmeralda battled the waves. Lightning cracked overhead, followed by the roar of thunder. She could hear the shouts from the guards over the breakers crashing, but struggled on across the harbor. Her strokes became more like thrashes as one wave dunked her, followed immediately by another. She sucked in water and struggled for her next breath. Her vision became cloudy. The shouts from the guards began to echo in her mind. Then, everything slowed down, as if time stood still. She was beneath the surface, the moonlight filtering through the water like flames licking against a log. What was this? Was she dead? She refused to believe that was it, that she had failed, and worse still, had no idea about her mother, or more importantly, her father. In front of her, she saw the stone floating on a staff in the water, and herself, her younger self, from the night her mother died, to one side. Opposite, she saw another young Canid, but her fur was different, almost like she was a mixed breed. Then a figure appeared between the two, and his eyes stared into her with a look of deep regret. Her father. The moonlight faded, and everything went black.
Esmeralda, not today, my pup. Wake up. Wake up and take my hand.
Her eyes shot open. She was drowning. She was beneath the surface. With one last desperate thrash, her hand connected with a branch. She pulled as hard as she could and broke the surface. Another breaker pounded over her head, washing her back off the log. She toppled, spearing her leg on a broken branch. She had to right herself, had to keep afloat. Through the waves, her stinging eyes and the pain in her leg, she heaved herself onto the log. Each surge of water pushed her closer and closer to the shore. As she lay there, she began to wonder about the plague, the engraving.
My 2 daughters. Who was the other girl?
Was her father the one who had owned the stone? Did she have a half-blood mule-bred sister? She shook her head. No, it had to be a dream brought on from all the adrenaline and chaos that had played through her mind that day. The water shallowed. She rolled off the log and slunk ashore. She coughed up water and sputtered, crashing down on the sand, and ran her hand down her leg. Her calf was tender, warm, and sticky, mixed with the wetness of her fur. This was the least of her worries. Vomiting up seawater and continuing to cough, she attempted to look back towards the castle through the rain. Her eyes, tormented by the salt and light from the countless fires of burning tar down the walls, she had to look away. It hurt to focus. Her head throbbed, her lungs burnt, and the taste of bile and seawater lingered in her mouth. She knew it wouldn't be long until guards swarmed the opposite shore and found her. She had to move, but with her leg injured, she was going to have a difficult time getting off the beach, let alone back to the farm with Flynn. Several logs and boats had wrecked themselves on the shore of the beach, washed up from the storm. She eyed a boat and shifted towards it, hoping to find something to use as a brace. Finding an oar, she removed the straps from her leather armor and bound one end of the oar to her leg, bracing her armpit on its handle. Struggling to her feet, she stumbled for the brush beyond the beach and clear of sight. Throughout the night, she continued to hobble, until the first rays of the sun warmed her body. She took refuge on a roadside stump and looked at her injury.
It's as bad as it feels,
she thought, brushing the hole in her calf. She loosened the oar and attempted to hold her weight on the injured leg. Falling onto the oar, she buckled under her weight and jarred her armpit. Her ears dipped and she gritted her teeth, taking a step forward.
Just one step at a time, Izzy,
she said, trying to get movement back in her leg. The idea of waiting for a few hours until she could move a little better crossed her mind, but the old Canid wants the stone today. There was no time to wait around, and she had to move quickly, forcing her leg to straighten out and fighting through the pain. Even if she didn't have the deadline, this wasn't a safe place. The guards would be out looking for her, and no doubt Jenna would be trying to recall who she was.
Dumb mutt,
she chuckled, walking back towards the oar on the roadside. She had to move, but with her leg still causing her some pain, she would never cover the ground fast enough to make it back to the forest beyond the wards, and she still needed to get the stone off Flynn. She camped out on the roadside, concealed by a large, shady shrub, waiting for the sound of a horse's canter. She lifted the oar, ready to swing it like a bat. A young Brachyurus rounded the corner, his black hair and gray fur flicking up from the momentum of the horse. She swung the oar like a cudgel, knocking him to the ground. He fell, tumbling into a tree stump in a cloud of dust. The horse slowed, then stopped against a bush and began to feed on the grass. She looked at the Brachyurus. He lay still, blood running from his nose. It soaked into his silver fur. She'd probably just killed him. She had hoped it was a guard, someone of importance, but he wasn't. Just a young, helpless pup. She slid off the stump and approached. Shouting sounded in the distance. The sounds of more hooves thundered up the track. If she stayed to check on him, she would be caught. She didn't have a choice, so she hobbled quickly towards the horse.
Whoever is coming will probably think he hit his head on a branch or something.
Knowing they would stop to help if they could, Esmeralda kicked the horse, forcing it into a trot. But as she rounded the bend, the thought of his face began to haunt her. She felt terrible, even as guilt flooded her body, but she didn't have a choice. She had to get back. Flynn's big, warm arms greeted Esmeralda as she stumbled through the door of the house.
Ezzy, you made it! I'm so happy,
he said as he squeezed her tightly. Struggling to breathe and with her leg caught at a weird angle, she felt like a rabbit in a trap, whipping her tail around, trying anything to break from his grip.
Flynn, let me go,
she called out. He grinned, then released his grip, watching her fall to the floor. Flynn laughed and sat on a chair, taking a wooden goblet of wine in hand.
We need to celebrate, Ezzy. You did it. We got the stone and we can finally get out of this hole.
She shook her head and pointed to her leg. She watched the smile fade from his face. He knew something was up. Not that she let on about the guilt she felt. Her heart was heavy, and the thought of the boy tortured her. It was as if she was the one who killed her mother. It was her fault.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I still need to deliver the stone. Most of the day is gone already, and no doubt we're gonna have to lay low for a really long time.
Flynn placed a goblet of wine down and smiled.
You know what, Ezzy?
What, Flynn?
We're going to fix your leg, make it better, and then we're going to go somewhere where it's just us and relax. Unless you want to be turned to stone. I think that would be very noble of you, and I could keep you forever.
Oi, there's nothing funny about this, you fathead.
Okay, don't get your mane in a knot. So, when are you supposed to meet this Canid?
Sunset, where he gave me the job.
The puzzle of the stone crossed her mind. Something was up, really up, and she didn't like it.
Flynn, where is it?
Where's what?
Don't play stupid with me. The stone, where is it?
He leaned back on his chair, his arm pointing towards her bed. She hobbled into the room, eyeing the bag on the bed.
See, told you it was there.
Flynn said, walking into the room behind her.
Why? What's wrong with it?
She studied the stone. Its former brown color, now like a strong current of water on the change of the tide, moved within it. Flynn leant in, taking hold of the stone, and just like that, everything stopped, and it was just another rock.
Weird,
Flynn said, placing it down on the bed. The pair looked at it.
Flynn, there was a plaque next to the stone, and there was something about 2 sisters and an apology. I believe this was my father's stone, and I have a half-blood sister somewhere.
Flynn looked at her, cocking an eye up.
Yeah, and I'm the king of Crasel. What makes you believe that?
This.
Her hand reached down, and the moment it touched the stone, a blinding light beamed out. She shielded her eyes, seeing stars and an immense heat like the steam above a pot of water over a fire. As her vision returned, she looked at Flynn, who was still shielding his eyes.
Oi, Muppet. It's safe to look now.
He opened his eyes and looked at her.
What did you do to it? You're not a runesman, are you?
She shook her head.
No, it has something to do with my father. I feel it.
She placed the stone back into the bag and then tossed it to Flynn.
Regardless, we're almost out of time. I need to finish the job and find out what the old Canid knows about my father.
Flynn nodded as he took one last swig of his drink and headed for the door. He turned, looking back at Esmeralda.
Essie, is everything okay?
He frowned.
Yeah, everything's fine.
It wasn't. The pup from earlier that day still haunted her thoughts. Flynn turned around and plodded back towards her, and then placed one arm around her waist and threw her over his shoulder.
Fine, but I'm going to bind your leg and then carry you, but only whilst you weigh as much as you do. I don't think I can carry a statue like this.
Oh, haha. We don't have time. Just put me on the damn horse.
He did so, placing her on the saddle, and then, grabbing the reins, the pair set off. For the late afternoon it was still oddly light, at least where they were. Everywhere else appeared to darken as the sun approached the mountains to the east, and ahead lay the forest and answers.
Wait,
she said. Flynn halted the horse.
What's up?
He asked, looking back at her.
Don't you get the feeling that this has all been a little too easy?
Flynn snorted.
Can't you just accept that this happens every now and then? That for once we can have an easy win? Is that what's bothering you?
She looked around.
No, it's not that at all. I mean, the stone was just sitting in a practically unguarded room. The castle was easy to get inside. The only hard part was the guard whom we fought together, and then the climb. But it all seems too easy.
Flynn shrugged.
Seems pretty average to me. I mean, you are comparing the job to the one we did in Agrialis, aren't you? If so, that was completely different. Yes, a lot of the elements were the same, but we weren't exactly in the middle of a war against the Horde at that stage. And your mind seems a little more occupied because something happens when you touch that stone.
She sighed.
I guess you're right.
Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a glint of sun off something reflective. Her head turned and her jaw dropped. Soldiers, about 100 of them, lined the field behind them. Her eyes traced the ground, halting at a change in the light. The ground about 20 steps behind them was noticeably darker. and like a ray of sunlight beaming through the clouds on a rainy day, the stone had cast a beam of light right on them, a beacon to their exact location.
Flynn!
She called out in a panicked voice. Flynn's head thrashed quickly from side to side. She saw the panic in his eyes. The light had cast itself from the moment she had touched the stone. He needed to touch it, and fast.
Here, Flynn, take the stone.
His hand dived into the bag, and almost immediately the rays of light vanished. He stepped back and looked up at Esmeralda.
What are you doing? We need to move now. We have to go.
No. Ezzy, remember what Mr. Marco used to do to all those animals? I'm not letting that happen to you. This is the only way.
This whole time the soldiers had been led right to them. Every last Canid in Crasil knew where they were now. And now Flynn stood between her and the soldiers. With the orange glow from the sun on her, Esmeralda looked down at him.
Now what?
She panicked. For the first time in years, she panicked. Her heart thumped hard against her chest. Her ears flopped and her tail puffed out.
Flynn, what do I do? What do I do?
He turned around.
You finish the job and find out about your father.
What about you?
I have a trick or two.
He grabbed a satchel from the horse's saddle, and then he dropped to the ground, placing a random rock into the bag.
See this?
He said, shaking the bag.
Now, Ezzy, go! It's no good if you aren't the one to deliver the stone. I always knew you were important.
He slapped the horse's rump. It reared up and then bolted off into the darkness. Esmeralda winced, her leg burning in pain under her weight. As she cleared the tree line, she pulled the horse to a halt and looked back towards Flynn. Soldiers surrounded him, their swords drawn and bows pointed at his head. He was on his knees, holding his hands out to his sides. As long shadows grew across the lands, the glow from the torches illuminated the group. Taking in a deep breath, the reality of the situation hit her like a boot to the chest. Flynn had just given up his own freedom for her life. Her chest felt heavy, followed by a dryness in her mouth. She wiped a tear from her eye. But why? They were partners in crime, good friends. But even then, she knew nobody had cared for her like this. Not since her mother. As the horse plodded along through the final remnants of daylight, she began to ask herself, did he love her? The first moon illuminated the spot where the old Canid turned the rabbit to stone.
I'm here, and I have it,
she called out. A gust of wind blew across the clearing, bringing with it a cool chill that sent shudders up Esmeralda's spine. She felt a presence stabbing into her like a knife.
Young Brachyurus, you are late.
Yes, but I have the damn stone. Now, answers. I need answers.
Show me the stone, Brachyurus. You're not in a position to be demanding anything, especially if you want your partner to live.
Her partner? He knew about Flynn being captured? How did he know about Flynn? Something was up. Her tail puffed out as she drew her blade.
Tell me what's going on now.
He held out his hand, his face shrouded in darkness. He moved his staff forward, the red stone atop of it emanating the same red glow it had had days before.
Show me the stone now, or you will meet the forever of darkness and become an ornament in this clearing. Show me the stone!
Esmeralda lowered her blade and complied, tossing him the bag. It landed at his feet, the stone rolling out into the clearing, its glow faint, just like the one on the old Canid's staff.
Very good. Your payment is next to you, sitting on that rock,
he said, pointing.
No. You are going to tell me what I want to know. Who is my father? And what was etched next to the stone in the tower?
What do you remember about the night your mother was murdered?
The old Canid asked. That night? Why was he asking this? She choked up and dipped her head.
A guard. A Volps broke into our home and my mother was murdered. Then she tried to kill me, but I got away.
She was no guard. It was an assassination, as was the attempt on your sister's life.
My sister?
It wasn't a dream then. The stone had some connection to her. She looked up and glared at the old Canid.
In the tower, there was a plaque with some text scratched into it. The days are dark, the sadness we face, my 2 daughters, I'm sorry. You are the hope now. I leave this, my bereavement. What does it mean? My father etched that, didn't he?
Yes, very clever. He did. The stone belonged to him. He was its guardian, the shaman of the Stone of Bereavement. Your father believed he had betrayed the people of Arillion, and we are on the doorstep of our own demise to the plagued parasite. What happened in Agrialis and Theala will soon happen in Cresel, and we will all die. That is, unless you decide to help. There is powerful magic that lies within this stone, a power to keep those still alive safe.
And what of my sister? What of Flynn? Are they safe?
Your sister is none of your concern. As for your partner, now you must make the choice.
A choice? What choice?
What have you done with Flynn?
I have done nothing to him. Do you understand why I asked you to complete this task?
She knew why. He needed her to take the stone. But the question lingered. What of her sister? Why wasn't she asked? And who was she?
Come with me, Esmeralda. Take your father's place, and you can help save us all.
She looked at the stone lying on the ground.
If I do, what happens to Flynn? Can we save him too?
The Canid shook his head.
No. If you choose your partner, I will find someone else who can take your place.
Her sister. She didn't care. This girl before yesterday was a nobody to her, and still was. Only relatable by blood, if she was even still alive. She thought about the boy she had most likely killed, everyone she had incapacitated or murdered over the years, her mother, and finally Flynn. He was all she had. He had always been there for her, always stood up for her. And now he had given up his freedom for her. Was it too late?
Flynn, how do I save him?
She pleaded.
Esmeralda, don't be a fool. You have only 2 options. Come with me and walk away, or choose to try and save him. But if you do, you are only turning yourself in. There is no hope for you if you choose that option.
Walk away? Walk away? Why was she feeling like this? Those 2 words cut deep into her heart. Again, the thought from before crossed her mind. Did she love him? Walking away wasn't an option. She had to do something. She couldn't let him die after all the years and conflict they had been through together. It would all come down to this. She gripped the dagger in her hand and screamed out,
"You fucking used me, and I'm gonna lose him too."
She tossed the dagger in the direction of the figure, hearing a thwang as it buried itself in the tree trunk.
Then so be it, you fool.
She looked up with tears of anger in her eyes to find herself now standing alone in the clearing. The old Canid and the stone had vanished. Esmeralda followed Flynn's captive party through the night. They were headed for the highlands outside of the Citadel cliffs, and the safety the cliffs held. She knew she only had one shot to rescue him. He walked between 4 soldiers, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear. He had large shackles around his ankles and wrists. 4 soldiers were too many for her to take at once, especially with the injury to her leg, and they were just the ones surrounding Flynn. It didn't help that he was in amongst a whole caravan of guards moving towards the front line. Her maneuver would have to take place at the top of the pass. There was no other option. She climbed back on the horse and proceeded to climb the pass to the highlands, planning to double back towards the convoy of soldiers. There was only one way she could see him getting out of there. She would have to get above the soldiers, ride down the hillside, and knock Flynn free of his captors. It seemed like the only possible solution. Doubling back to the top of the hill, she could see Flynn at the back of the platoon. She had one shot. She kicked the horse, forcing it down the side of the embankment. As the animal broke into a full gallop, the distance rapidly closed between Esmeralda and the group. The soldiers looked up at the cloud of dust barreling down the hill, raising their pikes just as she hit the road. The horse buckled under its own weight at the sudden change to flat ground, throwing her into Flynn. They collided and began to tumble down the steep hillside, dragging a large pile of sticks and debris in his chains. Stones rolled down beside them, with the horse tumbling closely behind. Flynn's arm grabbed hold of Esmeralda, and with a sudden jolt the pair stopped against a ledge, pulling themselves clear of the horse just in time as it toppled over the side to the valley below.
That wasn't your best idea, Ezzy.
I couldn't leave you, Flynn. Not to die like that. I had to try.
Flynn smiled and looked down at her leg. He placed his hand over the wound and she winced. She hadn't noticed during the fall, but the wound had split open. Her leg was truly busted now. The pain just hadn't hit.
Looks like I'm not going anywhere.
Flynn nodded, looked her in the eyes and smiled.
Why did you come back, Ezzy? You were free, not going to be turned to stone, and you had all the money in the world to live and be happy. And you found out about your father.
A tear ran down her muzzle.
Flynn.
She choked up, the words difficult to say.
Yes, I found out about my father, but you're the closest thing I had to a family since my mother was murdered. You've always been there. You're as close to an older brother as I could ever have. I couldn't let you go to your death for me. My life wouldn't be worth living without you in it. I'd rather be turned to stone.
Flynn petted her head.
I'd do it again for you, Ezzy. You mean that much to me.
Shouts came from the ridge above them. It wouldn't be long until they were found. With Flynn still in shackles and her leg busted, they weren't going anywhere. Esmeralda looked up at Flynn, drying her eyes with the fur on his arm.
Well, what do you think we should do?
Flynn sighed.
You are the one with the brains, Ezzy. If you're out of ideas, then so am I. We do the only thing we can do. We wait.
Esmeralda lay back, looking up into the night sky as a guard's pike pressed against her neck, wondering if she had made the right choice.
Just need some time now to get things clear now, to get rid of my doubts, to get rid of my fears. I just need some time now to get things done now, the things I love, things I want. I do what's best for me, what's best for you. But if you fall, who's next to you? I do what's best for me and best for you. I know it hurts 'cause I'm hurt too. Me and another you. fall, who's next to you? I do what's best for me and best for you. I know it hurts 'cause I'm hurt too. I need another you. Who's next to you? I do what's best for me and best for you. I know it hurts 'cause I'm hurt too. I need another you.